Channel 5 has always been dedicated to news and public affairs programming. Night Shift has followed this tradition with intriguing and interesting documentary and discussion programs. Subjects have ranged from high school violence to offshore oil drilling. Let's take a closer look.
And during that time, what was some of the experiences that you went through as an agoraphobic?
Well, I was a graduate student when I got hit by panic attacks, and I would get very panicky in the classroom. In fact, all my classes, I would feel terribly frightened. If I had to present a paper in front of my classmates, I would be frightened. When I was through my training, I was a professional, and every time I sat down to interview people, I would get frightened before sitting down to interview. And from there it spread to being afraid to go into a supermarket, to the dentist's office, to a doctor's office, even to going to a PTA meeting.
Would you go to the supermarket?
I'd make myself go, yeah.
Okay. And once there, how did you feel?
It was a very frightening experience to me. I would have preferred always to have someone with me so that I could have run out if the fear had gotten overwhelming. When the fear built up to a peak, I would just rush through the supermarket and grab things off the shelf that I thought my family needed. The worst part, as I remember, was standing in the line at the supermarket. I felt as though I just could not bear to stand there in this trap situation. And indeed, next time you go into a supermarket, notice baskets that are full of food that are just sitting in the aisles. And usually that's from someone who's panicked either just before a line, and they've had to leave all their week's shopping and run out of the store.
Do you know an agoraphobic when you see one? Would you know one?
No.
Right off?
No.
Okay.
No, but I can begin to spot them in certain situations. For instance, one of the worst problems, I think, for agoraphobics is church. Or a theater, something similar to that. And they will be the ones who insist upon sitting in the back row aisle seat. If you happen to notice someone subtly saying to the usher, no, I don't want to go forward, I want to be back here, you can begin to suspect that that's certainly not a dead giveaway.
And our most recent show has been on children of divorce, the effects of divorce on children and agencies that have been set up to help them.
I was only in 5th grade, so I was rather shocked because that was about 7 years ago, and I was quite ashamed of it because divorce was not a thing that happened then, and I was afraid to tell my friends. I really was.
Lisa, how about you? I was in 5th grade the first time my parents got divorced, and I felt basically the same way as Kasha did. But then my parents remarried, and in 9th grade, when I was in 9th grade, they divorced again. And I think the main difference was that I wasn't ashamed anymore. I was older and I was aware of what had happened. In 5th grade, I really did not know why they got divorced. I didn't know there was problems, but in 9th grade I did. And with this group also, I was able to talk to people that also had divorced parents, and I knew there were kids that did have divorced parents in 5th grade. I didn't know there was anybody, and I didn't want to talk about it. I think, now I could talk about it, and I'm not ashamed of it, knowing that divorce is also big around the country and around my school. I knew there was other kids. How do you feel about divorce now?
I think it's a good thing. I know that personally I would much rather have my parents divorced than having them together and always fighting, because then the family atmosphere is just horrible. You're afraid to talk to your parents because you're afraid they might fight about it, and it's really hard on the kids. Whereas divorce, it's hard on the kids at first, but in the long run, I think that you're a lot better off.
Well, we've been involved with Night Shift this is the 2nd year, and we've produced shows ranging from exploration of privacy rights versus press rights, and Vietnam veterans, I think, is by far our most successful show due to Karen's dedication.
The title was Vietnam Veterans, No Victory Parades, and the reason we chose the show was because we thought it had a bit of timeliness. You know, it was just about the time when Apocalypse Now was in the movie theaters and Coming Home and The Dare Hunter was on the television screens. And so Vietnam was on people's minds, even though the war had ended 5 years prior. And I think it's important that society not forget the Vietnam veteran because, you know, they're still all around. You know, and they still all have these problems.
You know, the United States is a good country. I believe that. It's a great country. And I don't want any answer to be misinterpreted that, you know, that I didn't believe that. But we get a raw deal in the sense that people are non-caring. Sometimes they've gone out of their way, okay? Well, when I came home from Vietnam, and there they are unloading us from these planes on litters and putting us on the ground on the airstrip in California. You know, the demonstrators are on the other side of the airstrip, on the other side of the chain link fence, yelling at us and telling us how stupid we were for going to Vietnam, you know. So some people went out of their way to make us feel bad, okay? Other people do it in passing, without really meaning to. I'll give you an example. Very recently, former President Ford was talking about the Iranian situation with the hostages at the U.S. Embassy there. And he was speaking, I believe it was before a group of people in Honolulu. And he came out with a statement. He said, it was the worst crisis since World War II. Now, I'm sure that every Vietnam veteran who read that in the newspaper or saw that on television said, what is this? You know, I mean, how can anyone overlook our crisis? You know? And this is typical of what happens. See, this is an example of the types of things that we get hit with every day. It's overlooked. You know, even today when people say, well, so-and-so served in the war, what do you interpret? It's always automatically World War II. How come? We've had our own war since then. In fact, there's been 2 wars since then. You know, so what we've got to do is break out of this mold that we're in, you see, about overlooking Vietnam.
The other thing that I, in my year and a half or so dealing with Channel 5 on this, is we have never been told what to produce or how to do it. We've been helped rather than confined or censored in any way, so that we've been given a lot of freedom and help in the areas where we needed to be helped. So, no, I'm very pleased, and I think I can speak for our students in saying that too, all across the board.